Good morning, Malta and Gozo, and welcome to another edition of Lovin Daily. I'm your host, Chris Perugine, joined today by Tim Diacono. And later on in the program, we'll be having an interview with Carl Brincat, the CEO of Malta Gaming Authority, to talk about the first story that we've got today, the biggest story from yesterday, that Malta got grey-listed by the Financial Action Task Force, the FATF. That's the first story. The second story we'll be talking about is the reaction to that by the Prime Minister, who won't blame Joseph Muscat, his predecessor, for the grey listing, but admitted that Panama Papers didn't help. We'll also speak about the Malta Employers Association, which has described the grey listing as embarrassing and self-inflicted. We'll talk about the crypto evangelist John McAfee, who died in a Spanish prison last night, and 100,000 euros worth of cocaine was found in a Birkirkara search. So Tim, get us started with the first story.
Big news yesterday, not great for Malta. The country has been grey-listed by the Financial Action Task Force. So despite Malta implementing a raft of reforms to improve its anti-money laundering regime in the past year and a half or 2 years since Manival gave us an initial fail score, and despite passing a test by Manival a month ago, Malta still didn't do enough to win the trust of the FATF, which is a group of powerful nations and organizations that oversee the global anti-money laundering network. Now, what does this mean for Malta? Time will tell, but it's quite clear that it's not going to be good, right? As in, the country is going to be under increased scrutiny internationally. The FATF is going to be constantly monitoring the country to see if we're implementing more reforms, and even more importantly, if the reforms are working on the ground. And there have been warning signs that it's not going to be pleasant for foreign companies who are looking to invest in Malta. Now, obviously, the government is playing down the implications of it. The finance minister said yesterday that the economy is not going to be affected at all. Let's hope he's right. But really, this should be a big wake-up call to Malta, particularly, this whole impression that we have, that we kind of sometimes that we live in a bubble, right? We don't. Actions and even inactions that happen in Malta do have repercussions on a global scale, and they have, and if we're going to do things that other nations, are going to get angry, they're going to react, and they did react. And some of the most powerful nations in the world reacted, including apparently America, the United Kingdom, Germany.
And so we'll speak about the reaction that the Prime Minister had yesterday. He called a press conference where he described the decision as unjust. He didn't explicitly say that one major reason is the previous administration led by Joseph Muscat, but he said that the Panama Papers scandal certainly didn't help. He also said things that happened before 2013 didn't help. He didn't specify what exactly, but he said that since January 2020, the government has been committed to changing, and although it's not perfect, it has this sort of mantra of never again, and this is the mantra that they want to continue to repeat. He stood by Edward Cicluna, who he appointed as governor of the central bank, despite the fact that he was the finance minister, when a lot of the corruption and other things were happening under Joseph Muscat's administration. He skirted your question, Tim, when you asked about Carmelo Abela, sitting minister, who is under police investigation for alleged involvement in a bank heist, who's been retained in cabinet, certainly not helping the FATF situation. Yesterday, as you said, Clyde Caruana also said that things aren't going to be dramatically different, or even not dramatically different from tomorrow for people. But I think the reality is that, just as an example of the reality in real life, like when you subscribe to one of these apps and you do a KYC and know your customer sort of information, etc. Now all of this due diligence and things will take Malta, will be looking at Malta on the same lines of a number of countries that are not trusted in this area. We'll speak about this more with our guest today. Worth saying as well, yesterday the opposition leader also gave a press conference where he proposed to have a national task force to try and resolve this matter. The Prime Minister responded by saying there already is a task force. I think there's a distinction between whether sort of it's being a political one or a technical one. Again, we might discuss that a bit more later on. Next story, we had some more reactions, right?
Yeah, the Malta Employees Association issued a very strong reaction yesterday, noting that Malta was actually the first EU member state, along with Romania, to get grey-listed by the FATF. They didn't mince their words. They said this is embarrassing for the country on an international level, and they also warned that the harm to the economy will be self-inflicted. So unlike the COVID-19 pandemic, which was completely out of our control, this was self-inflicted, and they pinned the problem down to corrupt practices by a minority of dishonest politicians. They didn't name the politicians they were referring to, but I think people do have a pretty good idea of who these people may be.
One of them was celebrating his wedding anniversary yesterday.
One of them, it happened to be his platinum anniversary yesterday. But what they didn't know, which I think is really part of the core of the problem, is that the problem isn't just a minority of dishonest politicians, it's the majority that supports them. So at the end of the day, I mean, Jason Sapardi made a pretty good point in Parliament yesterday. All government MPs voted in favour of Konrad Mizzi twice, despite the Panama Papers. Now, it might seem like a victory for the day, but the world was watching, well, it's not the world was watching, but parts of people in the international community were watching and they were taking note. And even though the implication may not be so visible straight away, it will then end up harming Malta's reputation in the eyes of the likes of the United States. It's something I think that's often missing from local discussions, right? The way the world views us. I mean, obviously we shouldn't just
the propaganda.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously we shouldn't just operate based on how the world thinks of us. Definitely not. We have our own country, our own independent nation, and we should act accordingly. But we can't, just pretend that people ignore us either, because we're a tiny island in the Mediterranean and just we can get away with things that other countries perhaps won't be able to get away with.
One of those things, I guess, was our intention to become blockchain island, and we had yesterday there was an update on one of the characters who had visited Malta in the blockchain during the biggest hype of the blockchain. John McAfee, who is famous for his antivirus software, McAfee. He's 75. He was 75 years old and was found dead in a Spanish prison yesterday, hours after a court decided to extradite him to the US on charges of tax evasion. So it's thought to have been a suicide, and he had spent 9 months in prison. He visited Malta in 2018. I had actually interviewed him as part of the Lovin Blockchain series, and he spoke about how blockchain could create a reality for there to be no taxes in the world, because basically he envisioned it as a way of getting people off the grid and not having to say how they've got their money and where they've got their money. And so now governments need to find another way of getting money that goes beyond taxes. But anyway, his story came to a tragic end yesterday. And yeah, go ahead.
I know, just a quick note about Blockchain Island. I really hope that the grey listing by the FATF doesn't lead to Malta just deciding to hold back and not be courageous embracing these kinds of new technologies. The problem isn't blockchain or cryptocurrencies. The problem is powerful people, acting completely corruptly and no action being taken against them. That's the problem, not Malta looking into a new technology like blockchain that's going to be eventually embraced by the rest of the world. We should keep pushing way more, in fact, than we actually are, despite the FATF, but then take action against corruption and against serious money laundering, not the small cases of the Gozo or whatever. And no, the actual serious cases, including big businessmen and politicians as well. And our final story: police arrested a 32-year-old Valletta resident after finding him with around 2 kilograms of cocaine in Birkirkara. The cocaine is estimated to have a street value of around 100,000 euros, so quite a hefty fine that would have ended up in sachets in many people's households. And yeah, that's the man is expected to be charged in court today, and we'll be hearing more details about this case later on today.
Okay, and now we'll just cut to a video clip of yesterday's press conference, and after that we'll be joined by Carl Brincat, the CEO of Malta Gaming Authority, to discuss the grey listing in more detail.
This is a process that involved engagement with international partners and foreign stakeholders. As a country, we have embarked on a series of reforms to strengthen our institutions, a process which we genuinely believe in because we are, after all, a serious jurisdiction. Although we feel that today's result is unjust with Malta, we remain committed to continue our reform program. We will also intensify our dialogue to explain Malta's achievements better and ensure they are both acknowledged and understood by the international community. What I can and will say today is this: we will never be uncooperative or obstructive. Instead, we will continue working tirelessly with a determination greater than we have ever had before. We will intensify our resolve to fight money laundering and the financing of terrorism. We will engage with our international partners as and when necessary. And we will strengthen further good governance in this country, which will serve as a solid foundation on which we will build our future economy. Thank you.
So welcome back. That was the Prime Minister's reaction yesterday to the grey listing, and today joined by Carl Brincat from the Malta Gaming Authority to get your first reaction to the grey listing. What is it?
Well, I was disappointed because, having been part of the process coordinated by the National Coordinating Committee on the raft of reforms that Malta has implemented, I have seen how the relevant national stakeholders in the country have taken this seriously. So I am disappointed for myself and for them and for the country at large. That being said, I do feel it is unjustified, but we must move past that. It's not particularly constructive just to keep dwelling on that. We know what we have to do. There are things that I cannot discuss today until the FATF issues its statement, but there are things that Malta has already been working on, so I am very confident that we have the right tools to get out of the grey list as soon as possible.
And what is that timeline? What kind of timeline could we expect? Is it something as soon as in 3 months' time, or is it something that could take years or longer than that?
It's very hard to put a finger on the exact timeline because it also depends when the FATF decides to review the specific parts of non-compliance that it has found. However, I would not expect it to take very long. I would not expect it to take years.
Okay. What would be like the best case scenario?
I cannot possibly. That would be.
So you're saying that you agree that it was unjustified, but you know sort of what areas they're likely to mention. So did you know those areas going into it? Were there some disagreements with government on sort of what to change, or
No, not at all.
or is it just some changes are taking longer to implement than others?
Not at all. I know the areas because I have the benefit of having an advanced view of the things that FATF will be disclosing tomorrow or Monday publicly. So.
Okay. So tomorrow or Monday we should be expecting to have more direct and public sort of reasons to justify this decision.
Yes.
But you think it's unjustified?
I do.
Anyway.
I do. Yes.
Okay.
Having seen what was implemented, I do. But again, we must move past that at this point.
So okay, let's talk about the impact of this. Now we're grey listed, right? So anyone who is working in, let's start with your industry, the gaming industry, you know, any employers, any employees, any people looking to become employers or employees, any businesses looking to invest in Malta, why does this affect them?
First of all, I think we need to take a step back from the term itself, because the term is ugly, obviously, the grey list. What is it actually? Because one of the things that I have noticed is that perhaps we are not necessarily understanding what it means in practice, and that is important.
Doesn't it mean that they don't trust us as a jurisdiction for financing?
No, because the Financial Action Task Force, and that is precisely why we need to discuss this. Yes, so perhaps we are in a list with other countries that we would not like to be compared to. However, when the Financial Action Task Force has its cycles, the metric stick, the bar, gets raised higher. Obviously, the assessments that it made years ago on other countries are not the same yardstick that was used with Malta in this particular assessment. So all they have decided is that in certain elements, there are deficiencies in Malta's system to fight money laundering and the financing of terrorism.
But what's the purpose of the grey list? Isn't it to warn other countries about that?
No, actually, the FATF, and it says it quite specifically, it does not mean that other countries must be cautious. What it does mean is that countries must take this into account when looking into Malta. Now, when the FATF, it's not
What's the difference?
It is a difference, because when the FATF makes it public what those deficiencies are, then obviously it is not that Malta as a whole is an untrustworthy jurisdiction, but if you are doing business with Malta, there are these very specific deficiencies that the FATF has found. It's not a generic problem with the country. That is a very different thing altogether.
So you agree with the finance minister when he says that nothing is going to change effectively for people? Because I'm sure you're getting calls from companies and people who are concerned about this reality and
well, our industry has been dealing with other countries and businesses looking at it as a high-risk industry, in many cases in an unjustified way, because they don't understand the safeguards that are put in place by our industry, to an extent has grown used to being looked at as a high-risk industry. Again, it's unfair, because when you look at the safeguards that the operators put in place, then they do not necessarily remain high risk residually after you take into account the safeguards. So not many things have to change. I would say that if, as the Prime Minister has said yesterday, we continue to focus on dialogue, because and that is why I said let's look beyond the term. Because the term itself denotes a reputational problem. But how do you tackle that? You tackle that by increasing dialogue, increasing transparency. Look, you are concerned because we have this label on us. Let us show you why you shouldn't be concerned in any case. And at that point, I think not much has to change, yes.
So your advice you are getting calls, right, from companies in your industry. What are they asking you and what are you telling them?
Well, most are asking what the practical effects of this are, because part of the concern is...
Are there any practical effects?
No, in principle, no. Not on the industry, definitely.
So if like KYC, due diligence and things like that won't take into consideration a Maltese person, a person from Malta or a company from Malta with more skepticism, with more caution, they won't be looking at that.
It will be factored into their decision making.
So that is a practical thing, no? Like the way the banks receive you, the way the financial...
But it isn't necessarily the case that it's going to happen. Take Iceland, for example. Iceland was grey listed, spent only 12 months within the grey list, but even rating agencies noted that, for example, international banks doing business with Icelandic banks or Icelandic companies did not change their risk rating for those companies. So it is an additional factor but it does not necessarily change the whole outlook. So the principal questions that I'm getting are what are the practical effects? And I would say, as I said, mostly it is reputational, so we need to continue increasing dialogue and transparency to earn the trust and continue earning the trust of the international partners that haven't been convinced yet, and that is important and that is a priority. But aside from that, I mean, every other practical aspect follows from that dialogue and that dealing with the reputational issue.
It's interesting that you say this. We asked the question to the Prime Minister yesterday that if we're compliant on so many areas and so much reform has been done, and Manival said okay and all of those things, then surely the problem is a lack of trust principally in the government, right? As in the people who are representing the country. Like, can you trust them to take proper action? And then you hear stories like having a minister who's being investigated over an alleged bank heist. You know, it's like, how can you trust in that sense? Do you, as someone who's on the technical committee to reach compliance and things like that, do you feel you're let down by political decisions or political stakeholders who are breaching that trust or not managing to forge strong enough trust?
What I can say is that whatever reforms have been required, I have always found the necessary support to implement them. That is what I can say.
Okay, so you're seeing that drive to create
every stakeholder, both at an institutional level and at a governmental level that I have ever dealt with on matters of implementing reforms on anti-money laundering, financing of terrorism, has always been supportive. I have always found that will.
And you haven't been very long in the role, but your two predecessors have both been either investigated or charged with trading in influence and having an unnecessarily close relationship with one of Malta's biggest businessmen, turned out to be one of the major people involved in government corruption and a person accused of being involved in the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia. I know it's a bit of an awkward question for you as a new person, but you were also there.
Yes.
So is MGA partly to blame for these sort of reputational issues as well?
I would draw a very clear distinction, and I am not commenting on the specific cases regarding my predecessors because I am not in a position to. But there is a very clear difference. If I'm going to put it on myself, if I personally have an issue, that does not mean that the MGA as an institution has a systemic issue. The MGA does not. And in fact, we were not criticized during the assessments, on the contrary.
Okay. And so your hope now, like looking towards the future, you're hoping to get this official feedback, which you already have some sort of visibility on, right, from the FATF, and then start working on those reforms to try and get us off the grey list as soon as possible. Is that important, to get us off the grey list as soon as possible?
It's more than a hope. I am extremely confident that with the plan that is already in place and is already being implemented regarding these specific deficiencies, we will be out of the grey list soon.
Okay, and do you think by the next review?
Next review, you mean October? That is very hard to say.
Okay.
That is very hard to say. Because obviously we need to convince, it is not I who needs to be convinced, but our international partners. But that is why we will continue working as we have already, and we will continue increasing dialogue and transparency.
And just to wrap up, your message to the industry who might be worried, who might be calling, who might be just a last message to them, even for a lot of the difficulties that they're undergoing as a result of these reviews and monitoring, etc.
I would say it's important to have two messages. First of all, this will not be because there is the reasoned fear that the institutions will go into overdrive and then overcompensate. That fear is unwarranted. That will not be the case. Proportionality is also an important part because we do not want to stifle legitimate business. That being said, we are fully committed to undertaking the necessary reforms soonest, and in fact it is already being implemented. So my message is, rest assured that first of all, this will be handled quickly and with the highest priority, and secondly, whatever difficulties they may face, they will find our full support.
Thank you very much, Carl.
Thank you.
And thanks for watching Lovin Daily. Have a day full of lovin'.